Hi. Some people come to me for spiritual direction. Others come to me for counseling. And sometimes someone will come to me and they're unsure of which one they're looking for. What's the difference between the two, spiritual direction and counseling? Well, to me, there's very little substantial difference between spiritual direction and counseling. It's basically a matter of what language is used in helping a person deal with life issues. In counseling, psychological language is commonly used. Things like anxiety, depression, effective communication, trauma, self-esteem, and so on. Those things are discussed. In spiritual direction, quote, spiritual language is often used in things like relationship with God, what God wants me to do. Am I doing God's will? Prayer life, morality, virtues, sin, and so on. Now, on the surface, counseling and spiritual direction may look and sound different, but each is dealing with the exact same thing, human life experience. Now, a simple and maybe simplistic definition of psychology is how a person views, perceives, and thinks about the world, which then affects how they behave or live. In this sense, everything is included under the umbrella of psychology, including how a person views or thinks about God or spirituality or religion. We humans cannot have a view of God or spirit without that view being affected by our upbringing, what we were taught, our life experiences, our cultural background, our gender, sexual orientation, and so on. All of that is what creates our psychological makeup. And that is from which we draw our views about everything. People, the environment, right and wrong, even God and religion. That all comes from our psychological makeup, which comes from all of that stuff. And from all of that comes our actions and behaviors. Now, whether a person comes to me for spiritual direction or counseling, I know that I'll be helping them deal with their perceptions of the world, possibly adjusting it to be more accurate and helpful, which hopefully will result in behavior that makes life better for them and others around them. So, here's an example of how psychology and spirituality are the same. The word father. That word brings up all kinds of images and connotations for each of us. For me, it reminds me of my father, who loved me, was a pretty good teacher, but was often short on patience as he was teaching. Those are the images that come to my mind when I think of the word father. I can't get away from those. They just automatically come up. Now, for another person, the word father may bring up totally different ideas, images, memories, maybe memories of and images of physical abuse that they experienced at the hands of their father. That's totally different than the images that come up for me. We all have our own thoughts, images, and ideas which accompany the word father. And they're all different. Now, what happens when we call God our Father? Well, we can't think about God as Father without our, quote, psychology coming into play and coloring how we describe and relate to God. So, for example, the ancient Israelites, their safety was often threatened by neighboring tribes. So they saw God, they imaged God at the Father, that word Father, as very much a God of power and might and war, who protected them and who defeated their enemies in combat. That's the image that came up for them quite a bit as we read in the Old Testament. Now Jesus, he called God Abba, which is often translated daddy. A very sentimental, intimate image. But it's a very different image in the Old Testament. Now, there are no right or wrong images of the word Father or God as Father, but we all have different ones. But both religion and psychology tend to draw distinctions between the right and the wrong ways to see things, including God. Psychology does this by putting a diagnosis on people who think and behave in the, quote, wrong way, the, quote, abnormal ways. There's something wrong with them in psychological terms. Now, religions label people as heretics or unfaithful if they have different views of God or religion than the religion professes or teaches. But I've never been very successful in helping people, or myself for that matter, by telling them that they are wrong in how they look at things. What I have found helpful, however, in working with people is to, first of all, understand how a person came to their particular view of life, their view of the world or themselves or God or whatever. To understand that. That means honoring that view and understanding that they came by it honestly through their life experience. I have to hear that and understand that. Then I listen for how that particular view has caused them problems. For example, the idea or the image or the view of that all men, including God, are threats. Well, that view can be pretty problematic for a person trying to live in this world. But only after understanding the person in this way and clearly communicating to them that I understand where they how they got that view, only then am I in a position to help them explore maybe a different way of viewing things, different way of looking at men, which might cause them fewer problems. Now, we don't have to be counselors or therapists or spiritual directors to help people in this way. All we need is an openness to listening to a person, simply listening, and trying to understand how they look at life, how they look at people, how they look at God or themselves, even when it's very different than the way we look at things, to understand their way of looking at it. As we do that, we develop trust in relationship with people, with that person. Only when we've developed that relationship of trust can we be in a position to better help that person, to provide maybe other ways to look at things that might be more helpful to them. As we're doing that, the goal always has to be, the bottom line always has to be compassion for the person and a desire to ease their suffering, rather than the motivation to correct them or to judge them or to straighten them out. That doesn't work. Appreciating and honoring the many different worldviews among us, even when we don't hold the same views, it's a powerful way we can work towards healing in today's polarized world.